"You're a thief," Ethan said. "You've been stealing from me since the day I was born, and everyone sitting at this table already knows exactly what you took." He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. The word landed anyway. Thief. Quiet and surgical, right across the Sunday roast, right across the good china Linda Carter had owned for 30 years and polished before every family gathering like some kind of ritual, some performance of the kind of woman she wanted people to believe she was. The room went still. Not the ordinary still of surprise. Something else. Something heavier. Like the silence of people who had been quietly rehearsing for a moment they always knew was coming. Cousin Megan set her fork down and stared at her plate. Aunt Susan's hand moved, flat and firm, to the tablecloth. Rachel, Ethan's older sister, who had known him his entire life and loved him fiercely, said 2 words. "Ethan, don't." She said it to the table, not to him. Not the way a sister says, "Stop, you're embarrassing yourself." The way a person says stop when they're afraid of what comes next, and have been afraid of it for a long time. Not, "What are you talking about?" Not, "Mom would never." Just, "Don't." As if the question wasn't whether it was true, but whether Ethan was really going to do this, here, now, in front of everyone. Linda looked at him from the head of the table. Her face was controlled. Carefully, professionally controlled, the way it always was when something threatened the version of herself she'd spent a lifetime curating. "I don't know what you think you're accusing me of," she said. But she never asked what he meant by thief. An innocent person asks what you mean. It had started 5 weeks earlier, in a basement that smelled like cedar and old paper. David Carter had been gone for 9 months by then. Pancreatic cancer. 11 weeks from diagnosis to burial. The kind of death that doesn't give a man time to finish his sentences. Ethan had driven home 3 weekends in a row after the funeral, just to sit in the house, going through things slowly, because going through things slowly was the only way he knew how to keep talking to someone who was no longer there to answer. The box was labeled MISC, keep, in David's handwriting. Tax records, expired warranties, a folder of old insurance documents. Nothing extraordinary, nothing that should have changed anything. Except at the bottom, rubber banded to a water-stained folder, there was a bundle of envelopes, 6 of them. All the same handwriting on the outside, a man's handwriting, not David's, not Linda's. All addressed to Ethan Carter. All stamped, "Return to sender," in red ink. All returned. All postmarked between 1995 and 2001. Ethan had been 7 years old in 1995. He'd been 13 in 2001. He had never seen a single one of these envelopes in his life. He sat down on the basement floor. He didn't remember deciding to sit. His legs just made the decision for him. He opened the first one. The handwriting inside was careful, like someone trying hard to sound calm. "My name is Michael Hayes. You don't know me. I've been told to stay away, and I have tried to respect that. But you're old enough now to decide for yourself, and I think you deserve the chance to know that I exist. I'm not asking for anything. I just want you to know that I have thought about you every single day, that I have never once stopped thinking about you." Ethan read it twice. Then he opened the second one. "It's been 2 years since my last letter. I don't know if you're getting these. I have to assume you are. I have to believe that someday you'll want to know the truth, because I know what it's like to not know the truth, and I wouldn't wish it on anyone." He sat on the cold concrete floor and read all 6 letters. His hands were steady. He noticed that, how steady his hands were. The way you notice strange details when the rest of your mind is somewhere else entirely, reordering everything. The last letter, dated November 2001, was the shortest. "I'm going to stop writing now. Not because I've stopped caring, but because I don't think these letters are reaching you. I think you've made your choice. I need to believe that. I'll leave this alone. I'll always leave a door open if you ever want to find me, but I can't keep reaching towards silence." Ethan's hands finally started shaking somewhere around the 4th time he read that sentence. Because he hadn't made a choice. He'd been 13 years old. He hadn't chosen anything. Someone had chosen for him. And that someone had kept these letters, rubber banded them, labeled the box, keep. David had kept them. Ethan sat with that for a long time on the cold basement floor. He didn't know yet what it meant. He wasn't sure he was ready to. He didn't call Linda, not yet. He needed to understand the shape of the thing before he walked into it. He started with the photo albums. There were 4 of them on the living room bookshelf, thick, well-organized, labeled by year in Linda's neat hand. He pulled the ones from 1987 and 1988. He'd looked through them 100 times growing up, the way children do when they want to understand where they came from. This time he was looking with different eyes. 3 photos of Linda visibly pregnant. 3. For a woman who had documented every birthday, every Halloween, every school play on roll after roll of film, 3 photographs of her entire pregnancy with Ethan. He found a photograph he'd never paid attention to before, a group shot at some family picnic, 1987. Linda in the center, David beside her, arm around her waist. And at the edge of the frame, slightly out of focus, a man Ethan didn't recognize. Lean, dark-haired, standing apart from the group. Someone had drawn a thin line through the man's face in pencil, faint enough to miss if you weren't looking. Like whoever had done it couldn't quite bring themselves to cut the photograph, but couldn't stand to leave it whole. He pulled out his phone and called Rachel. She answered on the second ring, too fast, as if she'd had his name on the screen already, like she'd been waiting, like she'd been keeping his number pulled up. "Did you know?" Ethan said. 4 seconds of silence. He counted. "Ethan, yes or no, Rachel?" "I think you should talk to Mom." Not, "I don't know what you're talking about." Not, "know what?" A redirect, practiced and ready. The kind of answer you give when you've already decided what you're not going to say. "I'll take that as a yes." "Ethan, it isn't that simple. It wasn't like..." She stopped. And then, "Just please don't do anything until you've talked to her." He hung up. She called back. He let it go to voicemail. He did not listen to the voicemail that night. Something told him it would be another version of the same rehearsed nothing. He found Michael Hayes in 2 days. Facebook, LinkedIn, then an old community newsletter with his name in it. Michael Hayes of Davenport, Iowa, 58 years old, 2 kids, a daughter named Kara, a son named Josh, who had his mother's coloring and his father's jaw. His father's jaw. The same jaw Ethan had looked at in the mirror every day of his 37 years without ever understanding where it came from. He messaged Michael Hayes on a Thursday evening. He said his name. He said he thought they might know people in common. He kept it neutral, careful, because he wasn't sure yet of the ground he was standing on. Michael Hayes responded in 11 minutes. "I've been hoping to hear from you for a long time." They spoke on the phone that Saturday for 2 hours and 40 minutes. Michael's voice cracked twice in the first 5 minutes. He said he'd sent letters. He said he'd assumed Ethan had received them and made a decision. He said he'd spent years telling himself that Ethan's silence was a choice that deserved to be respected, even when it felt like a wound that wouldn't close. "I had a son I never knew," Michael said near the end of the call. "I got to watch you grow up in photographs your aunt sent me. Susan. She sent me a few over the years. She was always sorry about what happened. But I never got to know you. I never got to be anything for you." Ethan wrote down that name. Susan. Then Michael said something that rerouted everything. "I want you to know I never walked away. I want you to know that I tried. And that when the letters came back, I thought it was you. And I'm sorry I believed that. I should have pushed harder. I should have..." He stopped. "There's no version of this where I don't wish I'd fought harder." Ethan drove back to David's house the next morning. He knocked on Aunt Susan's door on the way. Susan opened it before he finished knocking, as if she'd been standing behind it. She looked at his face, and her composure collapsed before he said a single word. "He called me," Ethan said. "Michael Hayes." Susan stepped back. He followed her in. She sat at her kitchen table with her hands folded in front of her and her eyes somewhere to the left of his face, and Ethan waited in silence until the silence became something she couldn't stand anymore. "I sent him photographs," she said finally. "When you were small. I thought someone should at least let him know you were alive. Linda didn't know. If she had known, she would have—" She stopped. "She intercepted the letters," Ethan said. "Every single one. For 6 years." Susan closed her eyes. "Yes." "And you knew?" "I suspected. I didn't know for certain until much later." She opened her eyes. "Ethan, your mother was terrified. When she found out she was pregnant, Michael wasn't in a stable place in his life. He had problems. Was he dangerous?" Ethan asked. "Because she told David he was dangerous." Susan's mouth went tight. "Was he, Susan?" "He had a temper," she said carefully. "Early on. By the time you were born, he had changed. Your mother knew that. A beat. I think she knew that." "So she lied about that too?" Susan said nothing. "She didn't just hide the truth," Ethan said. "She gave David a reason to agree with hiding it." Susan looked at the table. "David loved you," she said, and her voice had gone careful in a way that wasn't quite the same as cracking, deliberate, like someone choosing words around something they had decided not to touch. Ethan watched her face. "Did David keep those letters because he wanted me to find them?" Susan looked at him for a long time. Too long. "I can't answer that," she said, which was not the same thing as no. The Sunday dinner was Linda's idea. She'd called on Thursday. Cheerful, breezy. "We haven't all been together since the memorial. I'll make the roast. Tell Rachel to bring that pasta dish." Ethan had said yes. He'd said it calmly, easily, with zero indication of what he was bringing to the table along with himself. He arrived 10 minutes early. Rachel was already there, in the kitchen, helping Linda with something at the counter. When Ethan walked in, they both went fractionally still, the way people go still when a conversation has just ended and they don't want you to know it. Rachel smiled at him. He smiled back. He said nothing. He sat through the first half of dinner like a man waiting for the right moment to detonate something. When Linda started talking about a neighbor's kitchen renovation, laughing, gesturing, filling the room with herself the way she always did, Ethan put down his fork. "You're a thief," Ethan said. "You've been stealing from me since the day I was born, and everyone sitting at this table already knows exactly what you took." And now here they were. Linda's composure bent but didn't break. "I don't know what you think you're accusing me of," she said again, and Ethan noticed she still hadn't asked, "What do you mean by thief?" She was already defending a charge he hadn't formally read yet. "Michael Hayes," Ethan said. Megan made a small sound and looked at the wall. Rachel's head dropped, and it dropped fast, like she'd been bracing for that name, like she'd known exactly which name was coming. Something in Susan's expression went from grief to guilt. "Where did you hear that name?" Linda said, and that was the sentence that finished it. Not, "I don't know who that is." Not, "What does that have to do with anything?" Just a cold, practiced demand to know who had broken ranks. "He called me," Ethan said. "We talked for 3 hours." Linda's hand closed around the stem of her wine glass. "He kept every letter you sent back," Ethan said. 6 letters, addressed to me. I found them in Dad's things. Rubber banded. In a box labeled Keep. He let that sit for a moment. "David kept them. Did you know he kept them?" Something moved across Linda's face that Ethan had never seen there before. She hadn't known. That surprised her. He filed that away. "He was not a safe person," Linda started. "He had a temper in 1987, Ethan said. You were pregnant in late 1987. By 1995, when the first letter came, he had 2 kids and a house, and he coached Little League. You knew that. Susan told me you knew that." Susan went rigid across the table. "You told Dad he was dangerous to use as a reason to keep him away," Ethan said. "You said it was for my safety. And then you spent 6 years sending his letters back without telling me they existed, without asking me. Because you had already decided what I was allowed to know about my own life. You were a child. I was 13 when the last letter came. I was not 2 months old. His voice finally started to crack, and he let it. I could have read a letter when I was 13. I could have made a choice. You didn't give me one. Linda set down her glass. I built a family, she said, and now her voice had something raw at the edges, something that might have been real. I made a decision, and I built a life, and I built a family, and I protected that family, and I will not stand here and be put on trial in front of... Michael died, Ethan said. The room went utterly silent. 14 months ago. Stroke. I found the obituary. He kept his eyes on his mother. He's survived by a daughter and a son, my half-siblings, who had no idea I existed, because you made sure no one could find anyone. He died thinking I'd chosen not to know him. He died thinking I didn't care. Linda's eyes finally filled, and Ethan hated himself for noticing that it looked real. You took that from me, he said. Every year he was alive that I didn't know him. Every letter I didn't read. That was you. You decided I didn't get to choose. He stood up. That's the theft, Mom. You didn't steal money. You stole time. You stole a person. And then he died, and now there's nothing left to steal back. Rachel had both hands over her mouth, but she wasn't looking at Ethan. She was looking at the table, the same way she had at dinner the night before every big family lie, every forced holiday smile, every moment Ethan now understood she had spent knowing something he didn't. He looked at her for just a second. She didn't look up. She couldn't. That, somehow, hurt worse than anything Linda had said. Megan was crying quietly. Susan was looking at the table. Linda said, Everything I did because I loved you. I know, Ethan said, and he did know. That was the part he couldn't shake, that she had almost certainly convinced herself of exactly that the lie and the love had lived inside her in the same place for so long they'd fused together and she could no longer tell the difference. It didn't change anything. He picked up his jacket. Ethan? Linda's voice broke on the second syllable. He stopped with his hand on the doorframe, didn't turn around. David wanted you to find those letters, Linda said, quietly, almost to herself. Didn't he? Not a question. Ethan didn't answer. He walked out the door, and the cold hit him immediately, sharp and clean in a way the house hadn't been in hours. He sat in his car. He didn't start it. He just sat. He thought about David in the church parking lot, patient and steady, talking him through how to parallel park. He thought about David at his college graduation, crying in that clumsy way that had embarrassed Ethan at 22 and broke his heart now. He thought about David at the end, small and tired in a hospital bed, still trying to make Ethan laugh, still trying to take care of him right up until he couldn't anymore. He thought about a box labeled Keep. He had no way to know for certain what David had intended. No note, no explanation. Just 6 letters rubber-banded and preserved in the one box David had made sure to label with a single word that meant, "Don't throw this away." Maybe that had been deliberate. Maybe it had been guilt. Maybe, near the end, when David knew the time for telling was almost gone, it had been the only way left to give Ethan a choice that Linda had spent 30 years making sure he never had. He would never know. That was the part he hadn't been prepared for. He had wanted the truth, and he had gotten it, and it had come with a locked door at the center of it that would never open. Not David, not Michael. Just a family full of people who had carried pieces of the same lie in different pockets and called it love. And Rachel. Who had known? For how long, he still wasn't sure, and part of him didn't want to be, and had spent God knows how many family dinners sitting across from him, refilling his water glass, laughing at his jokes, carrying it without saying a word. Ethan sat in the dark for a long time. He thought about the word thief. He'd meant it when he said it. He still meant it. But somewhere between the box in the basement and the door he'd just walked through, the meaning had shifted, widened, until it held more people than just his mother, and more loss than just the father he'd never known. He had wanted the truth. He'd earned it. He'd gone and gotten it with both hands. And now he had to figure out what to do with the version of his life it had left him with. He started the car. The road home had never felt longer or emptier, and somewhere out in Iowa, in a house he'd never visited, two people who shared half his blood were going to sleep tonight, still not knowing his name. He thought maybe that was the piece he needed to do something about. He just didn't know yet if he had anything left to give.